Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the Strategic Storytelling for Business Brands webinar. Cesar is a psychologist holding dual master's degrees, one in organizational psychology and the other in professional communications. He's an adjunct professor of communications and public speaking for some of the top universities in Latin America and the US. He's the founder of 3 companies that focus on helping business leaders and entrepreneurs develop their influence and communicational impact by leveraging the power of stories. Cesar has worked with some of the top companies in the world, like PepsiCo, Walmart, MasterCard, MetLife, Kia, and more, training thousands of leaders and professionals in the art of strategic storytelling. He's also the creator and host of the Strategic Storytelling podcast, which is one of the top Spanish-speaking podcasts in the world. He passionately believes that we can all become better communicators if we learn how to become better storytellers. Thank you for joining us, and over to you, Cesar.
All right, thank you very much for that great introduction, and happy to be here. This is my second time actually that they've invited me to come and speak to you guys. And whenever I get invitations to speak to business leaders, to entrepreneurs, to people who today are trying to make a difference with their businesses, I hardly ever say no to those type of invitations, because I'm also an entrepreneur, someone who has started, like it says there, 3 businesses, 2 in Latin America, 1 here in the States. And I know the challenges, right? The ups and downs that we live and we go through when we're trying to have our own businesses. And I think that what I'm going to share with you today, hopefully will just be another tool that you can have in your toolkit of skills or knowledge that will help you to become more successful as a business leader. Now, me saying all that, I do want to start out, unfortunately, sharing some bad news. And this is bad news for any of us who, again, are trying to lead a business, are trying to stand out, are trying to have influence in our marketplace. And the bad news is that we live in a time, in an era, where we are just saturated by information. And this makes it really, really hard to stand out. You probably have lived an experience or a situation where you're with your business and you're trying to stand out, but because there's so much competition, so much noise out in the marketplace, it is hard to stand out. So we have obviously technology, which is a great thing. It gives us access to channels and podcasts and YouTube and things that we didn't have 20, 30 years ago. But at the same time, technology also takes people's attention. And again, the challenge is, how do we get people's attention? Because if we don't have people's attention, we don't have influence. And I'm going to repeat this because I do want this to be a sort of brain tattoo. And it's an important principle, not just for business, but in anything in life. If we don't have attention, we won't have much influence. And when we think about influence, one of the definitions that I really, I think is a simple definition, and it's something that helps me to really understand what influence is actually a quote from Dwight Eisenhower. You know, he was a general and a president in the United States. And when he talked about influence or leadership, he said that influence is the art of being able to take others where you want, but because they want to do it. Get people to do what you want, but because they want to do it. And the first part, actually, when you think about getting people to do what you want, sometimes it's not that hard, especially if you have authority or if you have a certain position. But getting people to do what you want because they want to do it, that is a real challenge. And that's influence. That second part is influence, being able to get people to want to do what you want them to do. And isn't that what, in a way, business is all about, right? When we present to our clients, when we have our meetings, we in a way are trying to get people to do something. A lot of times we want them to buy our products or our services, but how do you do this in a way where people want to buy your product, or people want to listen to your solution or your service? That is the question, right? How do we do that? Is there any important skill set that we should have, or is there some secret tool that the great influential brands and influential people have or use that we don't know about? And this is actually a question that I've asked myself for a very long time. How do we do that? How do we become more influential? And again, a lot of my work is focused on helping people become more influential. I work a lot with business and corporate leaders, helping them become more influential when they communicate, when they have meetings, when they have conferences. But I think all these principles are very applicable to a brand, because obviously as a brand, you're trying to accomplish the same thing. How do you get your message? How do you get your service? How do you get your product across in a way that is influential to people? And the way I actually got an answer to this question of how to do this came in the most unexpected manner. And just so you have a little bit of context, I'm a father of 4 kids. And the last 2 actually are twins. They were born 8 years ago. And when the twins were born, since obviously a lot of times when women have 2 kids in their bellies, it's really hard to keep them for a very long time. They were born premature. They were actually born 30 weeks. So they came out very, very small. And the smallest one, actually, because it's a boy and a girl, the smallest twin, his name is Tomas. And this is a picture of Tomas about a day or 2 old. You could literally see my hand was almost the size of his body. And when Tomas was born, the doctors told us because he was premature, he was going to have a hard time, especially the first few years of his life, breathing, right? He's probably going to have, they said, you got to really take care of him to make sure that he doesn't get any respiratory infections, because that could really affect him because his lungs are still not very strong. And, luckily, Tomas grew right here. This picture, he was about, I think, 4 or 5 years old. So this was a few years back. He is a happy, energetic kid. I mean, when he was about 4 or 5 years old, I remember it was winter time and he started getting sick, like a typical cold. And at first with my wife, we didn't worry too much about it. But then once he started getting very, very congested to the point where he couldn't breathe at night, we got worried and we remembered, his lungs are still not very strong. So we took him directly to his doctor. And once his doctor saw him, she said, I'm glad that you brought him in. And I think right now he's starting to get an infection, but we can give him some antibiotics to help him. And she showed us how to give him the antibiotic. It was, it wasn't that tasty kind of medicine because it was a strong antibiotic. So she said, oh, he's probably not going to like it very much, but you have to make sure that you give him a spoon every few hours and, for about a week. So she explained it in a way that made it seem so simple. And we went home with my wife. And that day, actually, my wife had plans already. So she was like, should I stay? Should I go? I was like, baby, just go. I'll take care of the kids. I'll take care of Tomas. No problem. And she went out and she said before she left, if we have any issues, if you can't give Tomas his medication, or just call me and I'll come home. And I said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. And she left. And about an hour passed, and now I had to give Tomas his medication. Now, I want you to imagine this because you probably lived something similar. I walk up to his bedroom and he's playing around with his toys. Even though he was sick, he's still playing. He's a kid. And the first thing I'm thinking of, okay, how am I going to give him this medication? And my first strategy that I used was I try to talk about the benefits. So I come close to him and I say, hey, Tomas, look, I have this medication for you and it's going to make you feel good. It's going to make you breathe better and you're going to feel so much better after taking it. Okay. And I filled up the spoon and I'm moving closer to his mouth to give him the spoon of medication. And right as I'm about to reach his mouth, he goes like this. No, I don't want any. I don't want any. And I'm scratching my head thinking, oh, wow, I thought this was going to be easy, but I guess it's not that easy. So what's my second option here? And after a few seconds, I remembered when I was a kid, at least, when my parents wanted to give me something that I didn't want, they would always play, do a little game. So I was thinking maybe I should do the little airplane game, and his mouth is the airport. So I started saying, hey, Tomas, look, here's the airplane. Open up the airport. Here I come. I'm landing. And right as I'm about to reach his mouth, he goes like this. No, I don't want any. Okay. All right. I got to breathe. I'm getting a little bit more frustrated because I've already used up 2 of my options. You know, I've talked about the benefits. I've tried to do a fun little game and it's not working. So my third option, and I don't suggest this as a good option for any of you, but this is all I had left. I said, I'm gonna trick him a little bit. So I walked up to him and I said, hey, Tomas, look, there's a dinosaur. And as he looked, I shoved the spoon in his mouth. The spoon completely in his mouth. And it was the worst, the worst thing that I could do, because he started spitting everything out on the floor and he started crying. And then the worst part of it all is he started saying, I don't want you. I want mommy. Where's mom? I don't like daddy. Oh my goodness. I knew I had lost the battle, right? If any of you have a 4 or 5-year-old, you know, when the kid starts saying that he doesn't want you, he wants his mommy, you've lost the battle. And as I was there looking at my son, just crying and yelling for his mom, I was thinking, I had almost this experience where these 2 little voices were in my head. One was saying, Cesar, you got to take care of this. I mean, you're the dad. You got to know how to handle this. And I had another little voice saying, you messed up. Call his mom. She knows what to do. And I wrestled with these 2 voices, one saying, you got to handle it, call his mom, for about a minute, until I finally I did what any wise man will do. I grabbed the phone and I called my wife. And when I called her, I said, honey, I don't know what to do. I'm here trying to give Tomas's medication. And I've been here for about, 10 minutes. I don't know, it seemed like 10 minutes and nothing works. I tried telling him that, he was going to feel better. He didn't want it. I tried playing with him. He didn't want it. I even, kind of fooled him a little bit and shoved the spoon in his mouth and he spit it all out. I don't know what to do. And she just listened to me patiently. And then she asked me a question. And the question was, Cesar, do we have any yogurt in the house? And I said, yes, we have yogurt in the house, but why are you asking me that? And she's like, do we have strawberry yogurt? Yeah, of course we have strawberry yogurt, but why are you asking me that? And she said, look, I want you to go in the kitchen. I want you to grab the strawberry yogurt that he likes, and I want you to mix the medicine with the yogurt. Mix the medicine with the yogurt. And then just give him the yogurt. Just tell him the whole time that you're giving him a yogurt. And as she was explaining this, and again, it seems so simple, I was thinking in my mind, it can't be this easy. Come on now. I've been battling here for 10 minutes and you're just telling me that the solution is to mix the medicine with the yogurt? And she said, yeah, it's that easy. I've done it. I do it all the time with the kids. And she said, so go and do that and don't call me back because that will be the solution. So I hung up the phone and I go to the kitchen, mix his favorite yogurt with strawberry yogurt with the medicine. And then I go back up to his room. And when I'm walking up the stairs, I'm thinking, right? I just had this traumatic experience with my son where I can't give him the medication. So I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to tell him? What am I going to say? Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? And then when I finally walk into his room and he was calmer now, he was playing again with his toys. I just said, hey, Tomas, look, I have your favorite yogurt, the strawberry yogurt. You want some strawberry yogurt? And he just jumped from the floor and ran towards me, grabbed the yogurt, and just started drinking it all the way down, just chugging it all the way down. And I'm standing there. I want you to imagine you're standing there looking at this, right? You had just had this huge battle, and now it was just so simple. The secret was to mix the medicine with the yogurt. That's the secret. Mix the medicine with the yogurt. Now, as you're listening to this, you're probably thinking, all right, Cesar, well, thank you for sharing that personal experience. And now at least I know how to give my kid his medication. But what does this have to do with our brands? What does it have to do with influence? What does it have to do with leadership? What does mixing medicine with the yogurt have to do with anything? And I think it actually has to do a lot with what you go through every day. Because as a business owner, every day when you're out there trying to market your product or your service, or when you're out there trying to communicate what you do, you're usually trying to give your market, your potential clients, medicine, right? You're trying to communicate something that you know will help them. I mean, I hope that that's what your product or service does. It helps people's lives. It solves a problem in their day-to-day. And just like me with my son, when I'm trying to give him his medication, which I know will help him, you probably get at times some setbacks, right? Or you get a little bit of resistance from your market. Either they don't pay attention, or they resist it, or they start challenging you with objections, when the secret is to mix the medicine with the yogurt. Now, I want you to think of this. The medicine is your idea, your message, your product, your service. That is the medicine. The yogurt are the stories that we use. Because just like the yogurt makes the medicine tasty, just how the yogurt makes the medicine much sweeter, stories make our messages, make our products, make our services much, much more desirable to our audience. And I think this is why Seth Godin, who's actually considered one of the gurus of marketing in the world, is considered the #1 authority in marketing in the world. When he talks about marketing, when he talks about how you as a brand can market and stand out with your products and your services, he actually says that clients, and especially today in this world that we live in where we're saturated with information, he says clients no longer buy just because of characteristics. They no longer buy just because of that. They buy because of stories. And I want you to think about this, because when you think about your brand and how you're communicating your brand out into the world, how you're communicating your services or your products, a lot of times, and I made the mistake as well. Okay, so I want you to know that I'm teaching you from my own faults here as well. A lot of times we communicate to our market, our brand, our product, our services, just based on characteristics. Sometimes we do it a little bit better because we talk about the benefits of our products or our services. But very rarely, and this I can say with conviction because I've worked with many, many companies, medium, small, and large corporate clients. Very, very seldom do I see companies telling stories, really telling stories. And based on, again, Seth Godin, who's done a lot of research on this, who's dedicated his life to studying the best brands and what they do to market and how they project themselves out into the world, he says clients no longer buy just because of your characteristics or even your benefits. They'll buy and you'll stand out based on the stories. Now, why does this happen? Why do stories work? And I think the first reason that I need you to understand here is that stories are just the way that we as human beings organize and communicate information. Our brains are hardwired to understand the world in stories. That is why when you go into a meeting, you probably lived this experience, you've gone into a meeting and you're in there and they're presenting a bunch of data and graphs and numbers. And probably when you leave that meeting, just a few minutes after, you won't remember anything that they said. Because our brains are not hardwired to remember numbers and statistics and data. Now that's a shocker, right? Our brains, and this is what all the neurological research has shown, our brains are hardwired to organize information and to try to understand it in a story format. So when we just communicate information, just to communicate information, nothing really happens. People don't change just based on information. Actually, one of the things that makes stories so powerful is that their stories are information, obviously, but they are information with emotion. Information with emotion. And emotions are what actually get us as human beings to remember things. That's why if I were to ask you, do you remember what the happiest moment in your life up to this point has been? Or do you remember the saddest, or the most traumatic, or the most wonderful? If I ask you those questions, which are obviously in a way are connected to very strong emotions, and I just give you a few seconds, you will probably start remembering things. And for some of you, you'll remember experiences that happened years and years ago. Maybe if I ask you, you remember what the happiest moment of your life was up to this point? You'll say, yeah, it was the birth of my first child. How old is your child now? Oh, he's 16, he's 20. And you're remembering that moment? If I were to ask you, do you remember the meeting that you went to on Monday? What slide number 3 said? I probably don't remember. And that was just 2 or 3 days ago. But we remember experiences that happened a long time ago because those experiences have strong emotional connection. And that is exactly why all the research shows that stories are up to 20 times more memorable than just communicating data. And again, I want you to remember these important principles and this important information, because if you're not using stories to communicate your brand, you're losing a lot of opportunities. Because again, stories make your communication, make your marketing, make your branding, make your products, your service, your messages up to 20 times more memorable than just communicating information. Now, the good news, because there are good news, right? I started with bad news today that we live in this world where it's so hard to get people's attention. The good news is that we can all do this. We can all tell stories because we are hardwired as human beings to tell stories. I go so far as saying we are storytelling creatures. That is what we do. We tell stories. And it's something that we are actually pretty good at. So you might be asking yourself, well, if we're so good at telling stories, then why do we need someone to teach us about storytelling? Well, we are good at storytelling, which is the art of communicating by using stories, right? And if you get together with your friends on Labor Day weekend, for example, you have a barbecue, you'll understand this, because what you'll notice is that you'll probably just be telling each other stories the whole time. When you sit together with friends or family and you're there for 3-4 hours and it goes by really quick, what you're really doing that whole time is you're sharing stories. And there we're pretty good storytellers when we're with friends and we're in those environments that there's no risk, right? We're good storytellers. Now the challenge, and this is why I'm here today, the challenge is that despite the fact that we're good at storytelling, we're not very good at what I call strategic storytelling. And there is a difference, just so you know. Okay, storytelling is the art of communicating by using stories. And we do this every day. Every day. You do this even when you talk with a colleague. Now, hopefully you become more aware of this and you realize, hey, I'm telling stories all day. Strategic storytelling, to me, the difference is strategic storytelling is all about being able to influence or generate change in other people by using stories. And there is a difference. Okay, we're not always using what I call strategic storytelling. We're not always trying to get people to change with our stories. Sometimes we're just telling stories because they're fun, they're funny, because it's just the way that we as human beings connect and we share values. But whenever you're trying to influence your audience, and again, this can be your market, this can be a client in a meeting, this can be your team, whenever you're trying to influence someone or somebody or a group of people to do something differently, you're trying to get them to do something, right? And you want to do it in a way that gets them to want to do that, but because they want to be part of it, that is where strategic storytelling comes in. So even though we're good at storytelling, we're not very good at strategic storytelling. To the point where when I usually teach this in companies and I tell leaders, hey, you know that you have a superpower, right? Where you have stories as a way, as a vehicle to generate change in people. And it's the most powerful communication tool we have. A lot of times my clients are like, what? I didn't know that. I mean, I know that we could tell stories and we could use a story maybe at the beginning of a presentation just to grab people's attention, but I didn't know that we could use stories as a communication tool to generate change, to persuade. And that is the same thing that you can do as a brand when you're trying to really influence your market. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to teach you how to do this. That is the idea of this webinar, is to teach you a very simple 4-step process so you can do this with your own stories. Practically grab either the brand story that you already have, the origin story, the product story, the service story, objection stories, client testimonial stories. Grab any of these stories and transform them into strategic stories where you can actually use them to influence change or get people to do what you want them to do, but because they want to do it. So that's what I'm going to teach you in these next few minutes. And I want you to remember something. I want you to remember this word, cosa. And you're probably thinking, well, what is this? What is cosa? Is that like an English word? Is that another language? Cosa is actually a word in Spanish, just so you know. I'm originally from South America, from a beautiful country called Chile. And cosa in Spanish means thing, like a thing. So I'm going to teach you now the most important thing or the most important cosa so you can craft or create a strategic story. And every time you remember this word, cosa, which hopefully now you add it to your vocabulary as a Spanish word, so I'm teaching you even a little bit of Spanish. Every time you think of this word cosa, you're going to also remember these 4 steps to be able to craft a strategic story. Okay, so you ready for this? The first step to be able to craft a strategic story is every story starts with what we call a context. That's the first letter, the C, the context. And I know the word context is not so tangible. It's not very practical. So I want you to remember something. Whenever you think of a context, the context is just where the story begins. So whenever someone tells you, oh, give me some context, what they're really telling you is, where did this thing start? Give me a little bit of where did this story start so I can understand it better. And when we talk about context, there's just 3 questions you have to answer to be able to create a really good context in any story or in any presentation. The first question you have to be able to answer is when? When did this story occur? Did it start a year ago? Did it happen 2 years ago? Did it happen in 1985? Did it happen in 2005? When did it happen? Now, this is an important question to always answer when you're starting your stories because it helps people to start imagining the time. The second question is where? Where did it happen? Referring to location. Did it happen outside? Did it happen at the doctor's office? Did it happen at your house? Did it happen at work? Where did it happen? And again, this question is to start helping people to visualize the context, right? Where did the story begin? And third question is who. And by who, I'm talking about who is the main character or who are the characters, but specifically the main character of this story that you're going to tell. Now, I want to show you something very quick because as you're thinking about these 3 questions, you're probably saying, oh, well, it's kind of, is it complex? Is it hard? Is it easy? The truth is we kind of already do this whenever we're starting a story. Whenever we're telling a story, we always say something like, hey, you know what? 2 weeks ago, I was in my office and I got a call from a client. Now, did you see what I just did? I answered these 3 questions. 2 weeks ago, referring to when, I was sitting at my office, referring to where, when all of a sudden I got a call from a client. So right there right away, I got a call with my client. I answered the who, but with 2, right? It's my story. I'm telling you a personal story, something that happened to me. And there's a client in the story as well. And with that, you've created a context. With that, you're helping the audience to start visualizing or to start imagining this place, this story that you're telling. And this is crucial because what you want to do from the very beginning, from the moment you start telling a story, And again, think about this as your brand story or your product story or your service story, is you want to start getting people to connect quickly with the story that you're telling. And when I say connect, what I'm referring to is you want people to, when they listen or they start listening to your story, to start in a way remembering their own story. So the most powerful brands, and hopefully I create awareness, because now you're going to start studying some of the brands that really do a good job of this. Like, for example, Nike. Nike is iconic for how they use their storytelling, and they are actually, it's in their culture as an organization to use storytelling in everything they do. Walt Disney does the same thing. Right? So all these very, very iconic brands that are way ahead of anything in their marketplace, they are very good at telling stories. And what Nike does, which is very interesting, whenever they have a new shoe coming out, they don't build out a commercial where they're going to talk about, look, this is what this shoe is made out of, these are the components, and these are the features. They never tell you those things. What they usually do when a commercial comes out with Nike is they'll just tell you a story. Usually it's a visual story, right? It's a commercial, so it's a visual story of, I don't know, I'll start out with someone waking up at 5 a.m. and they're tired, and they put their feet on the floor and they put on some sneakers and they walk outside as the sun is coming out and they start running, right? And they'll just run and run. And then all of a sudden you'll see the famous Nike phrase, just do it. And you're like, wow, I want those shoes. And they never talked about the shoe. They never talked about the characteristics. They just told you a story of a person who gets up early in the morning and wants to go run. And if you are a person, right, who is also someone who's trying to every day get up in the morning and go out there and do something hard, go out there and conquer the world in your own business, that will resonate with you. You will connect with that brief introduction to the story that they're telling, just because they told you a visual story. And that is the key in this first part. When you're trying to create a good strategic story, is you have to get people to connect with the place, with the time, or with the characters. Because when I start looking at a story, when I'm listening to a story, when I'm watching a story on a commercial, if I feel that in a way they're telling my story, I want to hear the rest of the story. I want to know what this is about. So the first step to be able to create a strategic story is it has to have a context, and the goal of the context is to generate connection. Now, the second step, the O, remember the word cosa, the O is the obstacle. Every story, and this is a rule, this is the golden rule of stories. Every story, every great story needs to have some kind of an obstacle, needs to have some kind of a challenge. I actually, when I think of obstacles, I think of these 3 letters, CDF, because it means, when I talk about obstacles, it means that your story needs to have some kind of a challenge or a difficulty, or there needs to be failure in your story. There needs to be something that goes wrong. There needs to be a struggle in your story. If there is no challenge, if there's no difficulty, if there's no failure, if there's no obstacle, and I'm going to be very upfront with this, it's not even worth telling. Now, my experience as an expert in communication and storytelling is that practically any story or experience that we remember in our life has some kind of obstacle. So I just told you a story of that time when I had to give my kid his medication. So it doesn't have a Hollywood type of obstacle, right? It's not a life or death situation. It's not that I got lost in the woods or had to fight off some huge wild beast. No. I mean, if you do have a story like that, that's awesome. And you can create a conference, a keynote, and travel the world telling that story. And there are people who have done that, right? People who have lived these sensational, incredible experiences, and now they travel the world telling that story, and they get paid a lot of money to do that. But for most of us, we have very simple stories, like trying to give your kid his medication. And we all have those situations. Trying to teach your kid how to ride a bike, or overcoming some injury, or overcoming an objection with a client. Those are everyday things that happen. But when we think about that story and we start analyzing, okay, it has a context. Does it have a challenge? Yeah, it has a challenge. The client told me that, you know, they didn't like my product, or I was playing a sport and I twisted my ankle, or I'm trying to give my kid his medication, but he doesn't want to take it. There is the challenge. There is the difficulty. And you know why this stage is so important? Because at the end, what you're really trying to do here is create emotion. You're trying to generate emotion in the obstacle. And this is the best place in any story to try to really play with the emotions, because there's an obstacle, there's a challenge, there's a difficulty. Now, the key to be able to show emotion, to be able to really get people to connect emotionally with this part of the story, is that you have to show vulnerability. If there's no vulnerability, people will not feel emotions. And I want you to understand something. And I do want to clear something up here. When I talk about vulnerability, I'm not referring to how a lot of like the mass media refers to vulnerability, because, you know, a lot of definitions, the vulnerability is a word that's been really kind of turned upside down. A lot of people, when they think of vulnerability, they think of weakness. They think of like poverty, right? In Latin America, when you talk about vulnerability, you think of poverty. The real definition of vulnerability, because it comes from psychology, the definition of vulnerability is your willingness to express openly your emotions. That is the definition in psychological terms of vulnerability, your willingness to express openly your emotions. But when you express emotions, when you show emotions, you're being vulnerable. And when you're telling a story, and especially if there's an obstacle, there's a challenge, and you show a little bit of emotion. When I told you the story about me with my kid, right? When he didn't want his medication, if you remember, I was like, oh man, what am I going to do? Oh, gosh, right? I had this voice in my head saying, Cesar, you got to take care of this. And then another one saying, Cesar, you got to call your wife, because you can't do this. You don't have the ability to fix this problem. I'm showing vulnerability. I mean, I could have said, oh yeah, I solved the problem easily because I'm such a good dad. And you probably would have been like, oh man, I don't connect with that story. I don't feel anything. But because I showed vulnerability, because I showed my weakness, because I showed that I couldn't handle the situation, you probably even remembered your own personal experiences where you're trying to give your kid or your pet medication, and and you go through that struggle. So the key to be able to generate emotion and get people to feel something is you need to show vulnerability. And that is the goal in this stage, is to get people to feel something. Because if they feel something, now they're going to remember your story a lot more. Now they're going to remember your story a lot more. And that is the second step. So we've seen 2 steps. I told you there were 4 to be able to create a good strategic story. First step is you have to have context to get people to connect. Second step is you got to have some kind of obstacle to get people to feel emotion. So what is the third step? Does the story end there? No. There's 2 more steps. The third step is the solution. So every good story will always have a solution. And this is an important principle, because when we listen to stories, when you're telling a story, when you're telling your brand story, there has to be a solution. A lot of times, just as a quick tip, a lot of times when we're using storytelling for our brands, right, we'll do in step 1 and 2 is we'll tell the story of, for example, a client who had this struggle or had this problem. And then in brand storytelling, we'll use the solution. This is where we'll introduce our brand. We'll introduce our product or our service as a solution to the problem. So the key and the important thing to remember here is that when we listen to stories, doesn't matter if we're watching a movie on Netflix, or we're listening to a story, or we're watching someone tell a story, or we're watching a commercial, we are always expecting the happy ending. There has to be a happy ending to this story. And when I talk about happy ending, I'm really referring to 2 questions. Either how did he or she solve the problem? That is a way that we create the happy ending, by telling the audience how did he or she solve the problem. Or what did he or she, referring to the main character of the story, learn from having gone through this experience? So the second question is crucial because there are times where we'll tell stories where maybe there's no direct solution. There's not an immediate solution. But now that we're telling the story and we're remembering the story, we do remember that there is something that the main character of the story learned for having gone through that experience. So at times, I'm not going to tell you the full story, but there are times when I'm teaching my clients this, and I'll share with them a story of when I was a kid and I had a dog, and I left the gate, the backyard gate open, and my dog left, ran out and got hit by a car and died. And when I tell that story, I usually end at that part where I say, and my dog died. And you're left with that feeling of, oh man, that's horrible. Your dog died. Why are you telling me this? And then since there's no direct solution to that because your dog died since you left the gate open and he ran out in the street, I always tell them, but even now, this happened many, many years ago. When I remember this experience, I'm reminded of the importance of making sure that all the details are well done. Making sure that all the details are well done. Because what happened to me, I was, again, a teenager, so I was distracted that day. When I got home, I was more worried about going into my bedroom and probably playing video games. So I didn't really focus on the detail of making sure that the door was left locked, the gate. And because I didn't focus on that little detail, my dog died. So when I share this story with my clients, I always tell them, what are the little details that maybe you think are not that important, or you're so distracted with other things that you're not focusing on, that if we don't take care of, could cause huge damage in our business, in our relationships, in our clients, in our service. And look what I did. Out of a pretty traumatic experience of having my dog die, I'm still able to get something positive out of it because I learned, because I changed. And that is the objective of this part of the story. When you talk about the solution is all about showing the change or the transformation of the main character of the story. So those are three. I told you there's four, and the fourth one is actually extremely important because it's what transforms this whole process into a strategic story. But I just do want you to remember, with these three steps that I've taught you now, and kind of understanding what the goal or the objective of each one of these steps are, you can craft a pretty good story, pretty good brand story. So first, remember, you need to have a context so you can get people to connect quickly with your story. You need to have an obstacle so you can get people to feel emotion. And you need to have a solution so you can show the change or the transformation of the main character of the story. And up to that point, if you just use these three steps, you're going to have a good story. I promise you. Just remembering these three steps anytime you craft the story. Again, it can be the origin story of your brand or the product story or the service. Just by remembering these three steps, you're going to create a better story than probably a lot of the stories that we kind of have, which I always tell my clients, they're not really stories. A lot of times what we do is just a quick overview of things, right? But a story is specific moments, specific conflict, specific solution. But there is a final and fourth step that makes this whole process strategic. Because remember, I'm teaching you the COSA method to help you remember strategic storytelling. This is a strategic storytelling method to craft strategic stories. So the fourth step, the A in this method, COSA, the A is what we call the application. And the application has everything to do with the audience. The application has everything to do with the audience. And what do I mean by this? When you're telling a story, okay, you could use a personal story. You could use a story of something that happened to you a long time ago. You can use, for a brand story, you could use a story of an experience with a client. You can do that. But you got to remember, when people are either watching the story because you created a commercial or you did something on social media or because you're literally telling the story, whenever people are listening to the story, they're asking themselves, well, what does it have to do with me? What does this story have to do with me? Or they're asking themselves, why should I care? He's telling me a story about this client, or he's telling me the story about this person that gets up at 5 a.m. and puts on tennis shoes and then walks out. What does it have to do with me? Why should I care? And this part in the application is where we should connect our big idea or our message or whatever it is that we're trying to communicate to our audience, what we want them to leave with. Because every time we communicate, every time we use stories, remember, stories are just a vehicle to get people to connect with a message, to get people to connect with some kind of idea that we're trying to communicate. And this part in the application is where I tell people why I told you this story. Sometimes not verbatim, right? Like if you remember the story I told you of my kid, of my son and the medication, if I would have just ended that story saying, and that day I realized that the secret is to mix the medicine with the yogurt, and I just ended the story there, it would have been like ending the story right in the solution, right? I was able to solve the problem thanks to my wife, and I learned that the secret is to mix the medication with the yogurt. And if I ended the story there, you would have been like, okay, yeah, well, I mean, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing that story. I don't know what it has to do with me, but thank you for sharing it. But if you remember what I did when I finished telling that story, I said, this is the application part. I said, now you're probably thinking, what does this have to do with me? I literally asked you that question because I'm already thinking you're probably asking yourself, what does this story have to do with me? And I said, well, this has everything to do with you, because this problem, this issue that I had with trying to give my kid his medication is what you go through every day when you're trying to communicate your product, your service, your brand out into the marketplace. You also get some objections. You also sometimes get indifference. You also sometimes don't know how to grab their attention or get them excited about what is it that you're presenting. So look what I'm doing. I'm using the story as a vehicle, emotional vehicle, but I'm still trying to communicate a message that applies to you. That you can ask yourself, oh yeah, oh, I had never seen it that way before, but you're right. Yeah, when I'm trying to communicate my brand out to the market, same thing happens to me. Sometimes, I don't know how to make my product or my service engaging so people don't pay attention to it, or I don't know how to handle some of the objections or the resistance that people have. Oh yeah, you're right. That does happen to me as well. So the key is that in this application part, this is where we connect. We connect to the story, the real idea or the message that we're trying to get across to our audience. And the goal here, again, every single stage has a goal or objective. The goal in this part is to get people to take action. We want them to leave with something that gets them to take action, that gets them to buy your product or your service, or at least want to know more about it, or to go to your website, or to go to your lead magnet if you have one. But we want to get people to take action. That is the objective. That is the purpose in this stage in the application. And that is cosa. That is the most important cosa, or the most important thing that you can do to craft a strategic story. So I want you to remember, I told you, this word is going to hopefully be ingrained in your mind, because every time you remember the word cosa, which means thing in English, I want you to remember these 4 steps. So the C refers to the context, okay? And the context, and remember the objective of the context is to get people to quickly connect with the story you're telling. The O is the obstacle. And this is where you want people to feel emotions. This is where you got to show vulnerability. The S is the solution, to be able to show the people literal solution or the change of the main character of the story. And finally, the application is to inspire people, to motivate people to take action. This is where we'll connect through our story, the idea, the message, the value. What is it that we're trying to communicate? Because I want you to know something. Whenever you communicate your brand, there should be a message that you're trying to get across to your audience. When you see the best, most iconic brands communicate and their slogan is "just do it," it's not just do it is not just because we just thought of a word. Just do it means something. It means certain values, certain principles that they want They want every time you to think of their brand, they want you to think of those values. Just do it, right? And you're telling me that if I want to go out there and just do it, if I want to go out there and conquer my field, if I want to go out there and conquer my challenges, I have to wear these sneakers so I can go and conquer. Yeah, that's what they're trying to tell you. That these sneakers, if we're thinking of Nike, these sneakers are the vehicle so you can go out there and conquer. And if you think of the best brands, that's what they're always trying to communicate. A certain message or a certain principle that they're saying, through our products or services, you can accomplish that. Through our products or services, you can go out there and conquer the world, right? Apple does the same thing. Apple also has very ingrained in their culture storytelling. That's something that Steve Jobs was crazy about, was storytelling. And at the end, what is it that they're always trying to communicate through their products or services? They're trying to say, with our products, with our services, you can go out and inspire the world. So if you're someone who's trying to inspire the world, if you're trying to create change in the world, our products or our services are the vehicle so you can create that change. Our computers, our telephones, these are ways that you can go out there and change the world. That's what they're trying to communicate. Now, some of you might be like, oh, I don't know, I don't resonate with that. And it's okay. When they do these marketing campaigns, they're not trying to reach the whole world. They're trying to reach a certain group of people who resonate with those values. And they'll tell stories that they know will resonate with those type of people, the people that want to go out there and conquer the world and that believe that through their technology, I can go out and conquer the world. People that just want to go and do it, whatever that challenge may be. And with that gear, with those shoes, I can go out there and do it. That is cosa. And this is the method that the best brands use to be able to craft and create strategic stories. And this is la cosa, or the most important thing that now you can start using so you can go out there also and create these powerful stories for your brand, for your product, for your services that will be able to really, really resonate, not only as information, but also as powerful emotion to get your audience to take action. Because remember, like I said at the beginning, if you don't have attention, you won't have influence. If you tell stories, you'll have people's attention. We are hardwired for that. And if you tell strategic stories, you'll be able to influence. You'll be able to generate real change in people's decisions, people's feelings, people's actions, so you can impact the world with your brand. Thank you very much. I hope that now you remember this cosa, the most important cosa, or the most important thing, so you can go out there and craft your own strategic stories for your brand.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was such a great presentation. And I guess now it's time for our Q&A. To our attendees, feel free, you can leave your questions in the Q&A box, or if you would like to ask your question verbally, you can raise your hand and ask away. We do have some questions coming in. The first one is, in a crowded marketplace, how can smaller brands with limited resources effectively compete using storytelling?
That's a great question. I think, like I said at the beginning, we are in a crowded market today, and that's just how it is. And I don't think that's gonna change. I think it's just gonna get more and more crowded. But at the same time, and this is an advantage I believe that we have in today's technological era, is that we also have more channels of communication than ever. Right? Before, 20, 30 years ago, if you wanted to market your brand, you'd have to buy a 30 seconds of a TV commercial, or maybe buy space in a newspaper, and that was really expensive. So at the end, the only brands that could do that were the big ones that had huge budgets. But today, you can start your own YouTube channel. You can start your own podcast. You can have your Instagram or your Facebook or whatever social media you might want to use. I always suggest use the ones where you know your potential clients are. You don't have to be in all of them, but be where your potential clients are. So for example, in my case, I use a lot LinkedIn because that's where a lot of my corporate clients are. So I share content on LinkedIn. And this is the other thing. Today, the best brands, the ones that want to stand out, more than just talking about their products or their services, they are really good at educating. They're really good at doing what we call today content marketing, where you market through the content that you share. And I believe that it doesn't matter the brand that you have, you always have something of value that you can give to your audience. You have some expertise, you have some kind of knowledge that your audience doesn't, and you can share that. And what it does, first, it creates credibility towards you, obviously creates attention, and it makes people bond with your brand a lot more because you're adding value, because you're helping them with something. So the first thing I would do, again, is see what medium, what channel I could use where my potential clients are. Again, whether that be on YouTube, or I could do a Instagram, or I could do TikTok, or I could do a podcast. I have a podcast, and just so you guys know, I started my podcast during the pandemic. And I started it because I said, okay, I mean, I was hearing a lot about podcasts, and I didn't have one. And I said, maybe what I do and what I teach podcasting could be a good medium to do that. And in just three and a half years, my podcast has become one of the top podcasts in the world in Spanish speaking. I teach strategic storytelling, and I mean, I don't know the exact number, but I could tell you that it's brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars, because most of my clients now, most of the people that find me and that want to that take me to their business so I can do a training for their leaders, or I can train them personally, or they'll take my courses, or they'll take my certifications. 95% of them come in through the podcast. They'll listen to my podcast, they'll find it somewhere, and then they'll start listening to a few of those episodes. And when they start listening to the episodes, and obviously they learn, and I try to always teach through stories and fun examples, so it's also engaging. Those people who listen to the podcast, they're like, oh, I want him to train me. I want to learn from him, because I obviously, like, if he's giving me this content for free on his podcast, then I can just, I can't even imagine what I'm going to get if I'm paying for his services. That's just content marketing. So first, find the channel, and then second, start creating content, not to communicate to everyone in the world, because you're not trying to communicate to everybody, to your audience, specific audience, and start creating content. And that's where storytelling will come in, because a lot of that content, you share it through stories, because it's much more engaging and emotional. And that's how you're going to start standing out, at least for that specific audience that you're trying to reach.
All right. Well, another one we have is, how do you measure the success of a brand story in terms of customer engagement and brand loyalty?
Yeah, I think there are different ways. Like, again, and if I give you the example of the podcast, one of the ways that I'm seeing the level of engagement, you can literally see the numbers, because it tells you the numbers of how many people are downloading the podcast, how long they're listening to it, how many new subscribers. So there are these type of metrics that you can use to measure, if it's having an impact or not. I think this is all marketing, remember. So sales and marketing are two different things, right? A lot of people are like, so if I tell stories, I'm going to get more sales, right? And I'm like, not necessarily, because you also have to have a good sales process, which are two different things, right? Marketing is to get people to know about your brand, get people to connect emotionally with your brand. But then sales is then how do you offer them the product or the service, and making sure that product or service is good. And then is there, after the sale, what comes, there's a whole process. So I always tell my clients, like, storytelling, if we're talking about it as a brand strategy, is about marketing. It's about how you get your voice out, how you get people to connect with your brand. How do you get fans? How do you get people to be loyal? And you can have metrics for that. Like, you can, again, if you have a YouTube channel, is your YouTube channel working? Are the people that are listening to your or looking at your YouTube channel, how long are they staying on the videos? Or are they, like, all these things, all these little metrics that are already there can help you to know if people are really engaging and if they're connecting or not with your brand. Are they visiting your website? All that stuff. If you get sales out of it or not will depend on your sales process. And for that, you have to have good salespeople that are well-trained, that know how to create good conversations, that know how to ask intriguing questions, that know how to close a deal. all these things are part of, I would say, are part of two coins. So if you have good marketing and you have good sales, now I think your business can really, really grow and expand.
All right, well, it looks like that's goes for our questions today. Thank you so much for, again, another great webinar. The Multifunding team really appreciates it. And to our attendees who joined, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Awesome. Take care.
You take care too. Have a good day.